Hi everybody, thanks for coming in today for our Rules as Code webinar. I just wanted to start off with a quick bit of an introduction about myself. So my name's Phillipa Martin. I'm Salsa Digital's Rules as Code lead, leading our Rules as Code practice. I've actually been working in the Rules as Code space, mostly doing business analysis for over 3.5 years now. It's a weird way that makes me both a newbie to the field, but also highly experienced because although Rules as Code has been around for a while, it's still a smaller emerging field and there aren't many people dedicated to working in this space around the world. Before Rules as Code, I worked in content and I have over 25 years with a background in content from everything from print way back when to online content, user journeys, and even crime fiction. And I actually completed a doctorate in that field. But we'll go back to Rules as Code because that's why we're all here today. So in terms of the agenda, we've got a 5-part agenda. I want to start off by looking at what is Rules as Code. I've got a really quick definition, but then also I'm going to show you 2 real-world examples because I think with Rules as Code, it's often easier to explain what it is by showing you some examples. Then I'm going to look at why governments are adopting Rules as Code, so some of the benefits, and also then moving on to what the Australian government is currently doing in the Rules as Code space, specifically through the GovCMS program. And finally, I'm going to look at when is Rules as Code a good fit. Obviously, for people here today, some of you may know nothing about Rules as Code. Some of you may know a bit about it and already have a use case in mind. So this final section hopefully will let you know if your potential use case or even just general business area is going to be a good fit for Rules as Code. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So we've still got a few more people coming in, but I will continue on. Okay, so let's start off with that definition. What is Rules as Code? At its most basic level, Rules as Code is about taking legislation, rules and policies and turning them into machine-readable code. That gives us a Rules as Code API and obviously some sort of user experience such as a website, but not limited to websites. Currently at Salsa, we're delivering our Rules as Code projects using 2 open source solutions. The first one is OpenFisca, which is a Python-based rules engine that was built in 2011 by the French government to codify its social security benefits. And secondly, we're using Drupal, which is an enterprise-grade content management system. It was really important for us. We've always been advocates of open source and working in the Drupal open source area. We wanted to find a rules engine that was also open source. So that is why we chose OpenFisca. Obviously, there are other rules engines out there, both proprietary and some other open source, but this is the one that we chose. Okay, so as I said, sometimes I think it's easier to actually explain what Rules as Code is by showing you some examples. So today, as part of this high-level overview, I'm going to show you 2 examples. I'm also going to show you what's happening around the world so that after this presentation, you can look up some of these examples. This isn't exhaustive, but it gives you a bit of a highlight of what's happening. So in the US, we have Benefits Launch Express and also Policy Engine, which has got code for Canada and the UK as well as US. In Belgium, we have the Aviation Portal. In France, there's a few implementations, including MESAIDS, which looks at eligibility for social security benefits for up to 500 different entitlements, so it's a large program there. In Australia, we have the GovCMS Rules program operational at the moment, and we also in New Zealand have Smart Start New Zealand, which is about service discovery. We'll send you through after this webinar a lot of links, and I'll include links to these so that you can have a bit of a explore yourself of some of these examples. But now the 2 that I'm going to focus on today, the first one is a New Zealand one, which is called Benefit Me. This is an alpha site that calculates eligibility and the actual entitlements for social security benefits. It has since been expanded out, but the original was 4. And this was actually the first Rules as Code project that Salsa worked on. I'll show you about that in a moment. And then the other one we're going to have a look at today is Policy Engine. I'll have a look at the US one. And these two show very typical rules as code examples to give you an idea of what it is. So let's have a look at Benefit Me first. So Benefit Me looks at 6 different social security benefits. It was actually created not by the New Zealand government, but by a independent collective, and Salsa donated money and also resources to that project in order to build out the New Zealand Social Security Act. So for people who are in this space or who've even interacted with it as a citizen, obviously to find out about social security benefits, you have to go through a lot of content. I mean, hopefully you don't have to read the New Zealand Social Security Act or the Australian Social Security Act, which is obviously incredibly dense. But even the summarised versions in plain English on website, there's still a lot of content to go through to find out if you're eligible, let alone to calculate how much you might get. And the rules as code version of this, instead of the user having to do that more sort of content heavy experience, they get to have information that's customized to them. So they would go through this form. So in this example, let's say that I'm a New Zealand citizen, I'm 34 years old, currently not working, I don't have an injury or disability, I'm single, but let's say I have one child who is 2 years old. I'm currently the sole parent or principal for that child. I don't have a split care arrangement, living apart from the other parent, and I do spend more than $20 a week in childcare costs. Let's say I earn $140 a week. I'm currently not on any of these benefits, and I'm not receiving family tax. I'm paying $110 in rental accommodation, and my postcode is 6114. So when we hit submit, and I'm not going to talk a lot about the tech in this session, but I can take questions about tech if people would like to find out more about the tech. But what happens is when I hit submit, this takes all of these inputs, which have been done through this Drupal web form, sends them to OpenFisca. OpenFisca then takes those inputs and calculates eligibility, and also in this case it's a how much you're eligible for. So the results page starts just with a summary of what the person has inputted and the information they've provided. Then it tells you that you know, this is your total eligibility. You're eligible for $494 after tax. It also then breaks down that eligibility, that you're eligible for $494 in job seeker, and you're entitled to accommodation supplement, but for some reason that's been zeroed down to no payment at all. That could be because of the postcode, a variety of reasons why they're entitled but not actually getting any income from that. So that one is our Benefit Me. Now the next one that I want to show you is Policy Engine. So this is the US version. So the first one was very much an example of creating an interactive user journey so that citizens can interact with the rules and get customized results. The other end of rules as code is using it to do policy modeling. Now in this Policy Engine example, they do have this compute my taxes and benefits, which is more similar to the Benefit Me what I just showed you, but they also have the ability to compute policy reform impacts. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as we go into the presentation, but just to give you a demonstration first, I'll do a really simple one that I often, when I'm showing people Policy Engine, I often use this example. It's just a quick demonstration of what would happen if we changed one of the income tax brackets. So let's just say the second income tax bracket, which is currently in the US at 12%, let's change that to 10%. And then over here it will populate with the reform in just a moment. There you go. So you're lowering the second tax bracket from 12 to 10%. And then we click the calculate the economic impact. Don't need to sign in. And then we are able to see the results. So this is really about seeing, like if you've got a digital twin of a policy or a piece of legislation, then you can model how changes would affect different people. So in this case, the government would cost the government $82.2 billion if the US government was to change the tax rate for that second bracket from 12% to 10%, but it would also lower poverty by 0.2% and raise income for 69.7% of people. And Policy Engine has the ability to dive deeper into some of this information here, so you can have a look at how it's going to affect different income deciles and how it's going to affect poverty by age, etc. Okay, I'll now take us back to our presentation. If anyone does have questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We've got Brendan on the line here from Salsa who'll be helping out with that. But also at the end, I do have a dedicated, a good 15-20 minutes available for questions. So there will be time at the end as well. Okay, let's move on. So now let's look at why governments are using rules as code. So from those two examples, you might already be thinking about all the benefits that it could bring to citizens and government, but let's break some of those down. So benefits for citizens include reducing ambiguity and providing a clear and certain citizen experience, as well as a centralized single source of truth. So with rules engines, you could have the one rules engine that's used by different interfaces. So it can be used by the public-facing citizen website, so the citizen can check what benefits they're eligible for and how much they should get. But the public sector staff can also be using the same rules engine to make those calculations. And it just ensures you've got this single source of truth. And I think you can already see from that example I did of Benefit Me, how it does provide a clearer and more certain citizen experience, because it's actually taking their inputs and giving them the exact information, rather than the person having to read through pages and pages and pages of content and trying to work it out themselves. The next benefit for citizens is it creates, it's more accessible, much easier for them to be able to interact with a form or even another voice experience than them having to read through complex legislation or those simplified versions of the rules that we pop on websites. And this also means that the laws and government are more transparent. In terms of for government, some of the benefits are that it's easier to manage and change once coded. So obviously there is work up front to code the legislation, but once it's coded, it's quite easy to change and manage. They're also reusable. So as I mentioned, you can have the one rules engine reused by multiple user interfaces and across different sort of sectors, both public facing, public sector, internal, etc. And finally, of course, we can use rules as code to inform policy, because you can model those changes. So that example I just showed from Policy Engine, based on modeling how changing a tax bracket from 12% to 10%, you can then make an informed decision about whether you're actually going to make that policy change. So you can really clearly see both intended and unintended consequences of policy changes before you introduce them. Let's look at some of these in a bit more detail. So thinking about this idea of having this reusable interface, you've got the one rules engine with the many interfaces, and that really helps with a whole of government approach and cross-jurisdictional as well. So you can have a rules engine that's used that has federal laws and state laws, or state laws and local laws, etc. So that if you've got any different jurisdictions which are using the same rules, or even rules that are combined together to form a complete rule set, you've got all of that available. You can also have different interfaces. As I mentioned, we've got a little diagram here. It shows you kind of like a voice interface and two websites. So in this example that we've got here, it's the Smart Traveller website. So we could have a rules engine that is serving out information to the Smart Traveller website. So the rules are owned by government. But because it's an API, then corporate organisations such as Qantas could also pick up that rule, so that they can then display rules information that's relevant to people flying to a particular destination, etc. So when we talk about policy engine and about the policy modelling, what you're really doing is creating a policy twin or a digital replica of the laws. Now, in an ideal world, and this is definitely one of the most powerful uses of rules as code, is to construct this policy twin. And in an ideal world, it would be done so that while you're creating the legislation, you're also creating a digital twin at the same time. And just in thinking about that digital twin analogy, the way I like to think about it is, you've probably all heard of digital twins for cities and how they can be used to model urban planning, infrastructure changes, etc. Well, the digital policy twin lets, as well as letting citizens interact with the rules quickly and easily, it also allows government and policymakers to experiment with policy changes and see how they'll affect both government and citizens. Rules as code for policy twins definitely has the power to revolutionise the way we draft and implement policy, and that policy engine was a really good example of that. And often, as I said, it's best if you can draft the legislation, the digital twin at the same time. So far, this hasn't been done anywhere around the world, actually. There's a bit of experimentation being done with it in Jersey, which is a nice small jurisdiction to work with. But mostly the digital twins have been developed after, and there's still a lot of value from developing it, because then we can do the modelling, the legislation and rule changes, plus providing that better citizen experience. And often what people have found is when they do put rules and legislation into code, they find little problems or loopholes. And so that's why ideally it could be done at the same time. So you end up with your legislation, your digital twin at the same time, and they've both been sort of cross-checked against one another. Moving on. Another benefit is looking at a cost-benefit analysis. So again, we'll provide this link, but you could also Google. This is the title of this article that was written by Tim D'Souza. So in late 2023, Tim D'Souza did an extensive cost-benefit analysis. And as I said, there's more detail in this article, but the bottom line was that for every dollar invested in rules as code, there was a $2.61 benefit. So obviously that's a huge advantage for governments looking at doing this, and other organisations as well, of course. But it's not just seeing it in action as well. It's definitely recognised globally, rules as code, as a way that we can completely transform the way government works. So as an example, in 2020, the OECD released a paper called Cracking the Code, Rulemaking for Humans and Machines. That's a dedicated paper to rules as code. Again, we'll send you these links, but you can also Google them. In 2023 and 2024, the OECD also released their Global Trends in Government Innovation, and both of those publications mentioned rules as code, gave some examples of how it's being used around the world, etc. And more recently, earlier this year, there was a G7 policy brief release that specifically looked at rules as code, how it could be adopted in the G7, the importance of rules as code, etc. So again, that provides some really good insights into rules as code and some of the benefits. Okay, let's look at what the Australian government is currently doing at the moment. So this is I'm going to focus on the GovCMS Rules as Code program, who some of you may have heard about, even be involved with, and others may not have heard about this. But definitely, Australia is paving the way. In fact, it's a worldwide initiative. We have a large community of the Rules as Code global community that we're in contact with, and we've had them say time and time again how fantastic it is that there's a large federal government department that's investing in rules as code in that whole of government approach as well. So just to give you a bit of the information about what that program is, they followed a 4-stage approach. Stage 1 was a proof of concept that was completed in late 2022. So this was following a tender that GovCM has put out for looking at personalised experiences. And one of the scenarios was talking about someone wanting to find out what benefit they might be eligible for. So Salsa responded to that, thinking that obviously Rules as Code was a great fit, having been working at that time on that Benefit Me project. So we completed a proof of concept for GovCMS From there, they decided to do a Rules as Code sandpit program, which is in progress. It started in January 2024 and is going to finish in September this year. Also this year, we've been working on the production Rules as Code design. So how do we take this sandpits, and I'll talk a bit more about the sandpit program, and roll that out into a production-ready version of Rules as Code for the GovCMS platform. So that design stage was completed in January, and stage 4, which is the actual production implementation, is in progress at the moment. So in terms of what the sandpits are, they're really about letting Australian government experiment with Rules as Code. So GovCMS funded proofs of concepts for different government departments so they could see how how Rules as Code could apply to their use cases. And also during that whole engagement, we would take them through the end-to-end process, starting off with rules mapping, moving on to the OpenFISCA coding, the Drupal web form build and results, and it allowed these government departments, as I said, to test their use cases, but also to test the tech stack. GovCMS could test the tech stack out, but also each individual government agency that was part of that sandpit program could test the combination of Drupal and OpenFISCA, or in some cases, OpenFISCA with another front end. And one of the really important aspects of that program was to also upskill the Australian public sector in Rules as Code. So we did discovery sessions with them. There's been training sessions that we've held as well, and even training some of their developers up to use OpenFISCA and take over some of the coding. So it's been a really strong element of that is about this upskilling the Australian public sector in Rules as Code. So, so far we've done 13 proof of concepts and another 2 underway before the program finishes in the proof of concept part finishes on the 30th of September. The 2 underway, one's about ready to showcase and the other one's just in the discovery stage. So some of the sandpits, so the sandpits are all password protected. They're not on the GovCMS platform. They're on a different platform and they're not publicly available. And some of them we don't have permission to show for various reasons, sensitive data, etc. Not sensitive that it didn't need to be on official sensitive, but just that the government departments didn't want to be publicly sort of sharing their proof of concepts at this early stage. But some of them we do have permission to mention and to demonstrate, and so I'm going to look at some of those today. So the first one, I won't take you through this, but we did one for the DTA, which looks at compliance with the investment oversight framework. The current experience is very much, again, that content-rich experience where they need to go through a lot of content to find out if, and their end client is actually government departments. So government department has got a new investment proposal that they're wanting to get funding for, and they have to read through quite a lot of information at the moment to find out if they need to comply with this investment oversight framework or not. And through the Rules as Code implementation, there's just a simple form with, I think it's like 5 or 6 questions, and then they're told automatically if they do need to comply with that or not. Another one was built for the Department of Finance itself that looked at eligibility and severance pay calculations. I will show you this one because it's a good example of the calculations element. You've seen the calculations with Benefit Me, but I'll show you this one as well. So all of these were built in a very similar templated website so that just to get them spun up quite quickly so that we could focus on the Rules as Code element, bearing in mind that these are all very small proof of concepts, 96 hours in total of engagement. So they had to be limited in scope as well. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. So this is calculating whether someone's eligible for severance pay. So we don't actually need to put a name in there. So let's say, oh, the other thing too is we always try and put questions that would disqualify the person at the front. So if they selected casual here, they get told that you're not entitled to severance benefit. However, if they select ongoing, then they continue on through the form. We didn't do every single type of employee and classification and pay point. We just did a sample of them, just as again to reduce that scope. So let's say this person makes works a 32-hour week. They have 45 hours in annual leave entitlement. They are receiving a parliamentary staff allowance, and they are ceasing employment because their employer will cease to hold office, and they've completed 10 years of continuous eligible MOPS Act service. Then again, we click that calculate, goes to Open Fisca, works out if they're eligible and what the payment values would be. As you can see, it's very fast. It's been designed to do these really quick calculations. So in this case, it comes back with the total net estimate and then breaks it down into, what the person's salary is, their PSA and the total salary, the payment they'd get in lieu of annual leave, and then the severance benefit as well based on this information up here. We also have the ability to view the rule statements. This is really important. It helps with transparency. Just tries to create a really simplified version of the rules, and it does help for people who are, wanting to say, well, why am I getting this certain amount of money in this case, or why am I not eligible? So I'll go back to our demonstration, to our slide deck now. There we go. For the Department of Health, we looked at eligibility for different hearing services, for 2 different types of hearing services as a quick proof of concept. I'll move on to our next couple that I'm going to show you though. For Federal Circuit Court and Family Court of Australia, we looked at divorce eligibility. So I will show you this one. And I also wanted to show you at the moment, if the person wanted to look at divorce eligibility, there's this page here. There's some information before you start. The eligibility in accordions here, so it does step them through, much like a web form, but they kind of have to step themselves through rather than being automatically guided. And as you can see, there is a bit of content involved as well. Has your marriage broken down? Have you been separated for 12 months and 1 day? Do you have a marriage certificate, etc.? And then there's other, things you need to consider, for example, if you're living under the same roof. And if we compare that to the rules as code version, so in this one, of course, you've seen similar format. The person is asked a series of questions. So let's say that they're currently legally married, born in Australia, no nullification or divorce applications been lodged. Let's say that they are separated but living under the same roof. They've been separated for 15 months. They will not resume their relationship. They've been married for less than 2 years, and they were not married in Australia. Let's say they were married overseas and they have a marriage certificate in a language other than English. And then we hit submit. I'm choosing some of these more perhaps on less common scenarios to show you one of the other things, which is, as well as providing you with a result, they're eligible for apply for divorce in Australia. Based on their actual inputs, we're able to provide really customized content. So everyone gets this a block of that they have to provide proof of marriage documentation, but it's different depending on what information they've entered. So here you can see because they've said that their marriage certificate is not in English, they actually need to provide these 3 documents. And then because they selected that they've been married for less than 2 years, they also need to provide a counselling certificate. And because they've selected that they've been separated but living under the same roof, they also need to provide an affidavit stating that. So again, it just really helps to provide that transparency and customized experience in your situation. Because your marriage certificate is not in English, you need to provide this. In your situation, because you've been married for less than 2 years, you have to provide this. And these blocks aren't displayed if they don't select that, so they get this really personalized experience. And the last one I'm going to show you is looking at Federal Safety Commissioner building regulations. So with this one, it's about whether the Work Health and Safety Accreditation Scheme applies. Again, we've got this sort of early exit as we've done with all of them. So scheme does not apply. Let's say yes, building work is being carried out in Australia. It's not for a residential single dwelling house. The project is valued at 4 million or more. It is not part of a joint venture. They are the head or principal contractor and the work is being funded by the Australian government. And then it will tell them if they have to apply for this, if the scheme applies. So based on the information you provided, it does apply. This means you must be accredited under the scheme. Again, we've got this show me the rules so that they can sort of see what the rules are behind this as well. I'll just take us back to our presentation now. So the last thing I want to cover off today is when rules as code is a good fit. So perhaps, as I said at the start, some of you came in with a potential use case for rules as code, or perhaps now that you've seen some of these examples, you've thought of a use case, but you're not sure, is it a good fit or not? So I'm going to give you some examples, but of course you can always reach out to us with your specific use case to find out whether we think it's a good fit, but these will give you a basic guideline. So rules as code is definitely really good for eligibility. I think about 75% of our use cases are focused on eligibility. It's an excellent fit for rules as code and open FISCA. And these can be with or without calculations. So I've shown you examples of both eligibility without calculations and eligibility with calculations today. And it could be for things like visa eligibility, divorce eligibility, etc. And with calculations, it could be for say social security payments, grants, scholarships, severance pay, etc. And in this use case, the user would answer questions to find out if they're eligible or not. And if they are eligible, the rules engine would calculate how much money they should be paid. And as I said, OpenFisc is really good at calculations, so these are always good use cases. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is classification, another really good use case. This could be medical classifications, building classifications, security classifications. And in this use case, the user would answer questions to find out the classification of their item. So it might be your building is classified 1A, which means these rules apply, or your software program is classified high security required, whatever it might be, and then you can see the rules that apply to that. Compliance is another really good use case. Does this building plan meet local council requirements? Does it comply with building regulations, etc.? And in the compliance use case, users answer questions to find out if they're compliant or not. Obviously, really good use case is if you're wanting to build a policy twin specifically for modelling, and that could be if you've got new legislation that you're drafting and you want to draft a digital twin at the same time, or if you've got existing legislation and you want to model it. So as I mentioned, this is definitely one of the most powerful features, and so that's always going to be a good use case, a good fit for rules as code. One thing to note, thinking at a higher level, rules as code is definitely better for black and white yes/no scenarios. They're easier to code. But having said that, there is some room for subjectivity. So for example, in some of our proof of concepts, we've provided an eligible page, a not eligible, and a maybe eligible. And we've said, it looks like you're eligible, but we need to you need more information on your medical condition, for example. Otherwise, it could be that the applications are sorted into two groups, one that's eligible and one that needs a person to go through and do a quick review of an area of the law that is more subjective. So the rules as code can do the first round of all those black and white, and then you've got the person coming in to do that final human subjective analysis. But they've been helped with the easy ones by the rules as code system. When rules as code isn't a good fit, two examples, decisions that are entirely subjective or mostly subjective, or sometimes things can be executed faster and more easily with another technical solution. For example, a lot of those proof of concepts that I showed you, you could do just with a web form. But because we had to do that because it was a reducing scope. But if you're talking about a much bigger, like modelling a whole, the whole Social Security Act, for New Zealand, for Benefit Me, or for Australia, then obviously, OpenFisc is a really good fit because it's going to give you that ability to do calculations. Rules as code in general is a really good fit for that. But there may be some scenarios if they are isolated and you don't want to do a whole of government approach where you're putting all of your rules into a rules engine, then it might be better to look at other technical solutions. It's always about looking at the problem and finding the best solution, thinking about the broader picture as well as just the problem itself. There is actually, I have done a whole presentation that specifically looks at when Rules as Code is a good fit and when it isn't a good fit. That's for the Rules as Code Guild. So we'll send that link through as well, so that if you wanted to dive a bit more deeply into some of the cases where it's not a good fit, you can have a look at that one too. I did for that presentation create this bit of a checklist. So, you know, a criteria to look for. So prescriptive and mostly objective black and white rules, big tick for Rules as Code, eligibility use case, you know, usually work really well. As I said, compliance, classifications as well. A use case that includes calculations, a use case where you're wanting to do some simulation or modeling. And of course, whole of government or cross-jurisdictional solutions. So if you're not wanting just to build out your tiny little use case, but you're thinking bigger whole of government, and you're perhaps responsible for a small section of the rules or the act, but you realize it's going to have massive benefits if you build it in a more whole of government consolidated approach, then Rules as Code can be a good fit then. And that brings us with 20 minutes to our Q&A. So I'm not sure if people have any questions that you want to ask online now. We can type in, I believe, into the chat.
Q&A module just on the Teams interface. There's been no Q&A so far, so we'll just maybe wait another couple of minutes.
Did anyone have questions about use cases or technology, etc.? Everyone's gone shy. As I said, if you do have questions that are really specific to your use case, then you can always reach out to us after this event. But you may find that there are questions that you have that others are also thinking about. So, you know, feel free to pop that in the chat. Nikhil.
Can I ask a question?
I guess we'll let you ask a question.
I guess maybe you can kind of clarify or explain how the Rules as Code stuff works with Drupal, like a website, or Rules as Code and Fisker, maybe? Just maybe elaborate on that.
Yeah. So what we did was when we were working on that Benefit Me project, which ended up being a Drupal website, we created a module which is called Web Form Open Fisker. So you can look it up on drupal.org. And that module is basically an extension on the normal Drupal web form module. It allows the API from OpenFisker to be put into the web form as a handler, and all the values that are coded in OpenFisker show up as options when you're creating that web form. So you put in the Drupal, the questions that are going to be shown to the person, but you also put in how that maps to the OpenFisker variable that's already been coded. And so that's how we link up Drupal and OpenFisker. But OpenFisker has an API, so it can be linked with other front ends as well. Of course, being very much heavily involved in Drupal, our go-to was to create that integration with Drupal.
Right, so basically Drupal is just kind of the front end, and then it connects to OpenFisker. So you can use any front end, really.
Yeah, you can use any front end that you want. The OpenFisker, because it's an API, it can integrate with anything. But it just depends on what you're trying to integrate it with. We do have one of our Sandpit clients who is looking at integrating it with React, for example. They have a React front end. And although for their proof of concept, we built a Drupal web form because that was part of the proof of concept, was to sort of keep it in a contained scope. But going forward, they're very much interested in making it, productionizing it on their website, and that will be through React integration with the OpenFisker API.
There is a question in there, Phillipa.
Oh, yep. I can't see that. So are you able to read that out
Not
to
a
me?
problem. It just says, is there any ready-made tech we can test scenarios? We use Drupal, for example.
Any ready-made tech? No, you would need to, in terms of wanting to use your use case to test your use case, you would have to do a proof of concept basically to sort of experiment with rules as code. But Drupal will work. That Drupal web form module that I mentioned available for use for anyone. It's what GovCMS is using, but it can be used on any Drupal website. But you would need to create the OpenFisker code and download that Drupal module and then link that up, create the web form on your website.
Andrew's asked if the recording will be available, and yes, it will. We'll send that out in the coming day or two. He's also asked a question. I guess the Open Fiscal uses AI, and that's government approved, Australian government approved.
OpenFisker does not use AI. In fact, OpenFisker, this is one of the advantages of rules as code. At the moment, you can go into your LLM of choice and ask it if you're eligible for, say, job seeker payment, and it'll come back with an answer. It'll sound like it's correct. It'll sound like it's sure, and it may or may not be correct. And this is why, I don't know if many of you may have heard of Pia Andrews, who's definitely a leader in this field, and she often describes rules as code as the guardrails for AI, because these are actual rules that have been coded by humans to make sure that they're 100% correct. You may use like an LLM to create a chatbot that interacts with the OpenFisker code, but the OpenFisker code itself is 100% accurate, and it is manually coded.
Just to elaborate on that, that's probably the advantage of it, is that because it is managed by people or managed and manually curated, it's going to be accurate. Maintaining that and maintaining the rules and code is one thing, but it is 100% accurate because it is actually done by a person going through and doing everything. It's not making anything up, it's not hallucinating, etc.
Yeah, so we work closely with subject matter experts to make sure that we get the rules correct. And then, they're reviewing it at every stage. So they review the rule statements, they review the logic. So we use, usually if, then, and or type of statements. So eligible equals true if, Australian citizen equals true. And, we go through whatever the requirements are for eligibility. And then they're checked by the subject matter experts as well. And then we create a spreadsheet, and that's checked by the subject matter experts as well. So it's all, there are ways that we're looking at using AI to speed up the process, but it's really important to have that human oversight. There has been a lot of research done in rules as code and AI, and so far, of course, it might change in a few years' time, but so far, AI cannot accurately tell you the rules. It cannot accurately tell you whether you're eligible for something or how much money you would get if you are eligible for it, if there's fiscal calculations. And the other thing, just on OpenFisker, it's not really related, but it's a really important point. OpenFisker, in terms of changing the rules, you're actually able to, so for example, let's use the Social Security example. Maybe you're going to have the income limit changes for one of your Social Security payments, so that on the 1st of January 2026, the limit of where it cuts off becomes an extra $100 a week that the person can earn and still get the payment. You would actually put that date in. You could put it in at any time. You could put it in right now, and then on the 1st of the 1st, 2026, it would just automatically start using that new value. But importantly, it keeps all of the historic values. So if some point in the future you needed to come back and check what someone should have been eligible for on, the 15th of June, 1988, if you had rules as code in place in 1988, which of course we didn't, but going forward, if in 2030 you wanted to see what someone was eligible for in 2025, you could actually do that through OpenFisker to check that the payments were correct in that year.
Just one more thing, I guess there is a lot of investment, time, effort to set things up in rules as code, but then you get that surety of what it is actually the output. It's like using Google Translate. If you use the auto translate, it's a hit and miss. It might get it right. If you give it a transcript of 100% accuracy, that's kind of the difference.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is going back to that cost benefit analysis. Yes, it is costly to create it just because there is that manual work in terms of analyzing the rules. So if you're talking about something, a huge piece of legislation, obviously it's going to be time consuming, but that research that was done in 2023 shows that even looking at that, you still get this cost benefit analysis of $1 investment leads to $2.61 return. So although there is that upfront, like a lot of things in the long run, it'll end up returning the value and more.
Couple more quick questions. What is the GovCMS module name? Is it available in the default module list?
So the GovCMS module name, it's the same module that I mentioned before, the Drupal, web form Open Fisker is the module name, but it's not actually in the GovCMS SaaS distribution yet because when we looked at the stages of where we're at the moment, we're in that production implementation, but we're not finished that yet. So they're looking at it being available within the GovCMS SaaS environment by, I think it's looking at early next year. So it's not available specifically in the SaaS distribution at the moment, but people can still use that module and link it up as long as they accept they do their due diligence on the module themselves. But yeah, at the moment it's not officially in the SaaS distribution, but it will be next year.
Next question is, can the rules be used across multiple products/forms?
Yeah, definitely. So that's one advantage of rules as code is you can have the one rules engine, you can have it being used by different forms, different government departments, different corporate in-house by public sector employees. The one rules engine can have multiple interfaces, multiple web forms. As an example of that, actually, for that original proof of concept that Salsa did for GovCMS before we even moved to the sandpit progress, we used one rule set for 2 websites, and one of them, and that was just to demonstrate really that reuse. And so we had 2 different websites that were with distinct different forms that were calling the same rules engine, same rules API.
And I think that's all the questions for now.
Great. Brendan, did you want to take everybody through the next steps? When we'll be sending out information, etc.?
Not a problem. Yes, probably tomorrow, I'd say. We'll have an email to those who participated today, and we'll give a copy of this recording as well as a bunch of resources that Phillipa has mentioned. And if you've got any questions, please reply to that email. I'll forward it on to Phillipa. And if there's anything else we can help you with here at Salsa, just reply to that email and we can look after you. So thank you, Phillipa, for your time. Thank you, everyone else, for your time. Akil, and thank you for your questions. And again, please reach out anytime, and thank you for coming today.